Welcome to the monastery, children. I hope you are all enjoying your time in this holy place.
Thank you, Abba. It's amazing here.
I had a question, Abba. How did the monks and monastery start?
This is a very good question. To answer it, we need to go back to the life of Saint Antony.
Saint Antony?
Yes, Saint Antony, the father of all monks. In the early church, Saint Antony was Egyptian and born to faithful Coptic Orthodox parents. He lived with his parents and younger sister, growing up in the church and being obedient to his parents.
Anthony, could you help me move some things around the house?
Of course, Father.
He sounds like he was having a pretty normal life. So when did he become a monk?
When Saint Antony was about 18 years old, his parents passed away, leaving him as the guardian of his sister. His parents also left him a large inheritance, making Saint Antony very rich. Even so, he continued going to church and trying to please God when something very special happened.
What happened at church?
During the gospel reading, Saint Antony heard the word of God speaking directly to him. He heard the reading from the book of Matthew, chapter 19, verse 21. Jesus said to him, "If you want to be perfect, go sell what you have and give to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven, and come follow me."
This reading is meant for me. The Word of God is speaking to me through this gospel.
Saint Antony understood that God was telling him a message. So afterwards, he went out and sold all his many possessions and gave the money to the poor.
But what about his sister?
Yeah, isn't he her only family left?
Yes, of course Saint Antony loved his sister very much. That's why the first thing he did after this was placing his sister in the care of faithful nuns who would care for her earthly and spiritual needs.
Please take good care of my sister.
May God be with you, Antony.
Wait, if Saint Antony was the father of all monks, then where did he go?
You're right. At this time, there were no monasteries, so Saint Antony lived alone in the desert near his village.
But if St. Anthony sold all his possessions, then he had no money. How did he buy food to live?
Saint Antony worked with his hands, crafting baskets out of palm leaves. He only earned enough money to buy himself bread, and if he earned any extra, he gave it to the poor. He also moved around in the desert. First, he lived in a small hut beside the Nile River. Then he crossed the other side of the Nile River to dwell in an ancient tomb of the pharaohs beside a fig tree. And then finally, he went deep into the eastern desert until he found a cave with a spring of water beside it. Through God's grace, Saint Antony overcame the devil in many intense spiritual battles. No matter where he went, Saint Antony never stopped praying, as he was always talking to God.
It sounds like Saint Antony was one of the holiest saints living in the desert.
Yes, he was. In fact, God allowed Saint Antony to meet another holy saint living in the desert, Saint Paul, the first hermit.
The first hermit? What's a hermit?
A hermit is someone who lives all by themselves and separates themselves from everyone. Through God's will, Saint Paul lived deep in the inner wilderness, where he spent 70 years without seeing another human being.
70 years?
That's a really long time.
So how did Saint Paul live in the desert all alone?
God sent a raven to Saint Paul every evening, bringing him half of a loaf of bread.
Wow, that's so cool. It really shows how much God cares for those who love him.
So how did Saint Antony meet Saint Paul if he lived all by himself?
God guided Saint Antony to the place deep in the desert where Saint Paul lived, and that evening something different happened. Instead of bringing half of a loaf of bread, the raven brought Saint Paul a whole loaf of bread.
For 70 years, God has sent me a raven every day, bringing me half a loaf of bread. But today, God has sent us a full loaf of bread to send your food also.
Praise be to God who cares for us, his children.
Saint Paul knew that he would depart to be in heaven soon, so he asked Saint Antony to bring him a tunic that belonged to the Pope at that time, Pope Athanasius, who was also one of Saint Antony's disciples.
Antony, please hurry and bring me the tunic that Emperor Constantine gave to Pope Athanasius.
Of course, Paul. I'll go bring it right away.
After their meeting, Saint Antony left to get the tunic for Saint Paul. On his way back to him, though, he saw the soul of Saint Paul being carried by angels up to paradise to be with God. Saint Antony entered Saint Paul's cave and found that he had already departed, kissed his body, and clothed him with Saint Athanasius's tunic that he asked for. and took St. Paul's fiber tunic as a blessing for himself.
How am I going to bury you, my friend?
While St. Antony was wondering how he was going to bury St. Paul, two lions appeared.
Oh no, did they attack St. Anthony?
No, actually, God sent them to help St. Antony. St. Antony realized that God had sent these lions to help him bury St. Paul. So he drew on the ground the spot, and the lions dug out a grave for St. Paul with their claws. St. Antony respectfully buried St. Paul, then left to tell others about the life and virtues of his holy friend.
So what did St. Anthony do after that?
At this time, St. Antony became the spiritual leader, or abbot, of many monks who followed him into the desert to live alone with God. As the number of these men grew, they would stay in their own private rooms called cells. These cells were located in a community called a monastery, where men would work and live together.
Oh, so St. Anthony started monasticism?
That's why he's called the father of all monks.
Exactly. The three main goals of the monastic life are voluntary poverty, or living poor on purpose, obedience, and celibacy, which means not getting married and starting a family. By working on these three goals of poverty, obedience, and celibacy, St. Antony created a life for monks to follow to work towards their eternal home in heaven.
So what did St. Anthony do after starting monasticism?
After many years of living in the desert to be with God, St. Antony went to heaven when he was 105 years old. God gave St. Antony the gift of knowing that he was going to leave this world soon. He gave special gifts to his friends, his staff to St. Macarius, his sheepskin cloak to St. Pope Athanasius, and another sheepskin cloak to his disciple, St. Serapion.
Do we have St. Anthony's story?
Yes, St. Athanasius, one of St. Antony's disciples, wrote his story in a book called Life of Antony, and we still have this book to this day.
When do we celebrate the feast of St. Antony?
We celebrate the life of St. Antony every year on the 22nd day of Tuba of the Coptic calendar, or January 30th.
What about St. Anthony's monastery? Do monks still pray there?
Yes, his monastery is still full of monks and is very active. In fact, to this day, hundreds of people visit both St. Anthony's monastery and his private cell in the mountain near the Red Sea in Egypt.
Wow, it's amazing how St. Anthony started a movement that monks all around the world follow today.
Yeah, thank you so much for telling us the story of St. Anthony, Eva.
Of course, children. Thank you for visiting the monastery. And remember, if we look at St. Antony's life, we find that we can learn many good virtues, as he mastered so many of them. Let us learn from St. Antony and strive to live a holy life full of prayer and joy of being in God's presence at all times.